Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I am your host, Tracy Stockrath. Here's my hands up here and camera's backwards. I'm founder of Thrive Meetings and Events and this podcast that you're listening to, and we are here every single Wednesday. I am excited to be introducing you to Miss Monica, I keep doing it the back way, Watrous, who is the managing editor of Food Business News. And as that editor, she covers the latest trends, innovations, and developments in the food and beverage industry. She's a lifelong foodie and a champion of startups and disruptors in the consumer packaged goods landscape. So all that packaged food that we eat in the grocery store, she loves to tell us all about that. So hi, Monica.
Hi. And I don't know if my microphone is picking this up, but there's a tornado siren happening right now.
Oh, no, can't hear
I'm safe. It's all good. It's just a warning, but I didn't know if that was like going to alarm anybody
let us
listening
know
or
if you
tuning
need
in.
to go somewhere.
No, thank you so much for having me. This is great.
I'm so excited. And because a couple of weeks ago, I had Larry and Adam Molodjeski talking about food and beverage trends from the hotel side. And so I really want to turn it around and really see, I saw a great post that you did about a speech you gave recently on trends in the industry. And I think that was the baking show, right?
Yes.
But I really want to bring it back to what food and beverage we can see coming out. And one question before I forget, I'm like, do they change by quarter? Do they change? How do you see those changes? So just throw it at us. What do you see right now?
Sure. So I would say that, I think people define trends versus fads, versus macro forces in different ways. And it's, not really clear. But in my mind, when I look across the consumer packaged goods landscape, there are 4 macro forces that are sort of defining the innovation that's coming out into the market today. And when I talk about innovation, I'm talking about that sort of cutting edge, the type of products that you would see at Expo West. So not necessarily something that the mainstream is eating, but maybe viewed as more aspirational, sort of like what you might see carried in Whole Foods. Or some of those types of grocery stores. But I think also kind of trickling into mainstream and mass merchandise, because Target is wanting to get more involved. Walmart's wanting to get more involved with these brands and with this type of innovation. So the 4 macro forces that I see that are really influencing all of this, the first one being sort of food with function. So not only are consumers expecting just sustenance and nourishment from food, but they're also looking for some sort of additional health benefit. So we're seeing a lot of foods that are being launched that contain things like adaptogens, which are substances like herbs and botanicals that are meant to regulate the body's response to stress. And the leader that's popping up everywhere right now is ashwagandha. And that's sort of a fixture of Ayurvedic medicine. So it's one of those things that has this great history and credibility to it versus something like CBD, which, popped up in some food and beverage formulations over the past few years, but doesn't really have that whole regulatory sort of, credibility going for it, still kind of murky on the regulatory landscape, and a lot of consumer acceptance issues as well. So ashwagandha is showing up in anything from baking mixes to ready-to-eat cookie dough to snack bars to trail mix. Just you name it, it probably exists.
I actually just looked it up for my mom like 2 weeks ago.
It's really interesting. And I have to say, I probably consume a lot of these products that contain it. I don't know if I'm personally experiencing any benefits from it or if it's psychosomatic. But, usually when it's in a formulation, it also comes with other sort of health promoting features that are appealing to me as an eater. So, things that might be made with certain sweeteners or certain oils, that sort of thing. So I would say that is the first trend, but also it's not just limited to adaptogens and nootropics, which help sort of boost cognitive performance, but also digestive health. We're seeing a lot of innovation around that. There's a really interesting brand that I'm writing about called Supergut, and it's a line of like shake mixes and bars that are formulated with this proprietary blend of resistant starch, which is really a key into tapping into the gut microbiome and sort of feeding the good bugs, I guess. And that as we're learning, the science is still evolving, but that the gut microbiome is really foundational to overall health. There's the gut-brain axis. There's a lot of benefits that impact mental health, inflammation, all kinds of things. So I think that that's a pretty powerful force in food and beverage innovation, and I expect to see a lot more of that. And consumers are here for it. They, in a recent survey with from the International Food Information Council, consumers indicated it was a good percentage. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it was, it was a significant percentage of people who were actually consuming more food and beverage products with functional benefits in 2021 than they even were in 2020, which is when we saw a lot of interest in like immunity and things like that. So I think the trend is here to stay. I think people are now sort of expecting more from their products. So that's the first trend. I'll go through the next three a little bit more quickly. So sustainability is obviously a huge driver of innovation, and that, that's taking shape in anything from plant-based to carbon neutral. We're seeing, like, I heard this term, carbon is the new calorie. And I think that's a pretty interesting way to kind of frame all of the consumer interest, whether they understand what, some of these claims mean in terms of like emissions or, carbon footprint. They are certainly interested in supporting brands that are protecting the planet in that way. So one of the really the most compelling examples of sustainability driven innovation, and I think we'll probably talk about it a little bit later when we talk about what we saw at Expo West, but that would be upcycling. And I think, it's something that's existed in the food and beverage industry and certainly in the hospitality industry, because chefs are very focused on stretching their margins and using every ingredient they can. And, whether that's like the parts of a plant that normally get tossed in a consumer's home, but they'll figure out a way to incorporate it into a dish to really stretch out their ingredients. In the case of packaged food, what that looks like can be anything from like a beverage that incorporates the leftover whey from yogurt production to like snacks that are made from ugly fruits and vegetables that would normally be thrown out, to like there's some really interesting spent brewer's grain is another example where when, in beer production, the leftover mash actually turns out to be a lot more nutritious than the part that gets extracted to make the beer. So it's a really prebiotic, fiber rich and protein rich leftover that was normally being fed to pigs or like tossed in a landfill, and now it's being incorporated into consumer branded products. So I think that's a really interesting trend that's here to stay within that whole sustainability message. And then a couple other trends or macro forces that are influencing innovation, I would say, are alternative diets. So people are taking very individualized approaches to wellness. And that could look like a number of things. It could be keto, it could be plant-based, it could be gluten-free, not because it's medically necessary, but because they think it's going to help them control inflammation or have other health benefits. So, and then of course, those are the people who are doing this by choice, but then there's also a significant number of people who live with food allergies who really need this innovation. And so we're seeing a lot of grain-free formulations that are made with things like cassava flour or tiger nut flour, which tiger nut is actually, it's an interesting, it's not a nut, and it's a tuber. It's a tuber. It's like but it has prebiotic fiber. And so it's there's a brand I really love called Mmly. That's MMMLY. And it's a cookie brand that tiger nut flour is the primary ingredient there. And it's a grain-free cookie. And then I would say the last thing is cultural integrity or cultural exploration. And that it's kind of a twofold thing where basically the American population is diversifying more quickly than predicted, and 4 out of 10 Americans identify as non-white, but they are not seeing themselves represented or perhaps misrepresented on retail shelves. And so founders are taking it upon themselves to start businesses that incorporate the ingredients from their childhoods or the flavors that they're not seeing in the grocery store already. And so we're seeing a lot of really cool innovation around like anything from prepared frozen meals to condiments to snacks that incorporate ingredients that Americans may not quite be familiar with, but that deserve to be in our diets and should definitely be on retail shelves. So I would say those are kind of the big forces that, a lot of other trends kind of ladder up to.
No, and I love them. And I'm seeing those as well. And even I was at the North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association event on Monday night. And the chef that won, he's like, Oscar Johnson, he's out of Charlotte. And he was like, oh my God, people love the food of my people. Right. And it was I actually didn't get by his booth to taste it. So I don't know what it was, but I know it had some grits in there and things, but he's just this, I saw him the next day and is just powerhouse. And he started with the food trunk and now he's going to have a retail location. Right. And just kind of doing that. And I think that's a really big trend, is understanding the food culture, because it's such a different aspect of it, of what we're seeing. And I think there was a lot of that. What's the great brand that, oh my goodness, I can't believe I can't remember. Jennifer Garner was supporting him. I'll think of it. But they've got beans.
Oh, A Dozen Cousins.
Yes, A Dozen Cousins. Thank you so much. Yes, A Dozen
brand.
Cousins. Great brand, great food. Had some of their stuff. I bought their stuff and it's really, really yummy. But I was at that upcycling session at Natural Products Expo West. And the one guy that I talked to that was interesting is that he's taking the cherry pulp that's used to make cherry juice.
Yes.
And he's like, but nobody knows what to do with it. Right. And so that's one of the challenges, I think, with that upcycling too, is that people are like, okay, manufacturers are trying to figure out, how do I use that? Right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a lot of creativity and a lot of innovation in figuring that out. But I think, like as with the example of the spent beer grains, a lot of the product that, the upcycled ingredient itself carries so much nutrition, and, that value needs to be brought back into the, the human food system.
Yep. And I think that if to explain it to people too, is like, okay, I have a Vitamix and I have a juicer, right? And the Vitamix, you put the whole thing in and it's juicing with some liquid help, pulverizing it and juicing it up. But when you put it in the juicer, you get the leftover pulp from that. And don't throw that pulp away. Throw it on a salad or throw it in a cupcake or something like that, right? A muffin, probably not a cupcake, but that's kind of that thought process of upcycling. So to put it in a different perspective.
Right. And that pulp has all of the fiber in that fruit. And so, not only are you preventing food waste, but you're finding ways to get those nutrients back into your body.
Exactly. So besides the brands that you mentioned, do you have any other examples of brands that you really like?
Oh, I have. I like so many brands. I made a little list in case I forgot. Well, so so one that going back to that juicing example that you gave, there's a company called Pulp Pantry, and they make like tortilla style chips out of the celery scraps and kale scraps of industrial juice processing. So like Evolution Fresh makes their cold pressed juices, and they end up with like heaps of the actual fibrous pulpy leftovers from the juice product. And so Pulp Pantry like gathers that, collects it, puts it in these chips. And so the chips, again, reducing food waste, but also delivering all of these amazing nutrients in a snack that it's really delicious. So, so that's a brand that I really like. And actually she was on Shark Tank, the founder of that brand. And and Mark Cuban made an investment. So,
nice.
Yeah. So that's one I really like. Midday Squares is an interesting brand that is getting a ton of buzz. It is it's billed as a functional chocolate brand, and basically it is like sort of a hybrid between a protein bar with like a layer of chocolate on top. Really clean ingredients. But I think what's really compelling about the brand itself is the founders, because as they were starting to launch this, they decided early on that they wanted to hire a videographer to document this whole experience of launching and scaling a business, all of the sort of hiccups and hijinks that happen along the way. And so these three founders have become personalities in a sense. And it's just a really interesting story. It's a great product. They have 3 SKUs. It's, there's a peanut butter one, an almond one, and just like a regular kind of brownie fudge one. But it's an interesting brand to watch in that they have really had some really early success, and but also just the way that they approach it, I think, is inspiring a lot of other brand founders.
Okay, awesome. And so let's jump to Upcycled, because there was a booth for Upcycled. There was the education session, but Upcycling had that booth. And are there any products do you like in that whole marketplace there?
Yes.
Upcycled?
Yeah. So one of my favorites that was represented there is called Cashew Love.
Okay.
CAJU. And basically what it is, it's a single ingredient product, but it contains the leftover part of the cashew. It's like the cashew fruit or cashew apple that is normally discarded when cashews are harvested. The nut part is harvested.
I remember seeing them.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because you can actually use that part of the plant to make this really great meat alternative. And they sell it just unseasoned, the single ingredient. You can shred it, you can cube it, and it takes on the flavor of whatever you season or marinate it with. And so I thought that was a really interesting product. I really like that brand. And Reveal is another, which is the avocado seed tea. So basically a couple of grad students they were looking for ways to reuse the seeds from all the avocados that we millennials consume. And they found that if you sort of brew it like a tea, you're getting all of these antioxidants and all of these benefits, but also you can then like compost, like it's easier to compost, or like the seed itself after that process becomes basically like it kind of like just, it's a lot easier to break down versus like a regular seed. It's just, there's nothing you can do with it. It just fills up the landfill. So it's a healthy beverage, but again, also has that food waste reduction benefit.
Okay. Awesome. I remember seeing Cashew Love. And I mean, the fact that cashews themselves are great for vegan products. I mean, they can take on cheeses, and I mean, I've used it in lasagna. Nobody knows that it's not dairy, right? Because I think that I love the fact that they're doing all of that too. How are these products, these trends decided on? I mean, where are they getting the data? I mean, and I'm a huge follower of International Food Information Council. I use their stats all the time. So I'm glad that you and I are on the same boat on that, because they've put some great stuff out there. But you and I are talking about it before the show, and I saw Jennifer Garner on on TV, talking about Kentucky and the devastation with the floods that they had and food insecurity. So we look at these trends, and some of them seem very, I don't want to say highfalutin, but not for the marketplace for necessarily everybody.
Yes.
So can you touch on that a little bit? And I'm not bad mouthing any of these brands, because but how do we figure that out?
Yeah. So first of all, to the first part of your question, I would say the consumer is deciding. The consumer is behind the trends.
Okay.
In the past, I think restaurants would start in fine dining, where restaurant chefs would make something, it would gain traction, and then it would sort of become more mainstream, and then it would emerge into packaged food, and that's like sort of the trajectory that a trend would follow. And now I think it's it's social media. Honestly, I think a lot of conversations being had online are driving a lot of the discussions behind some of this innovation. And I mean, all the brands I talked about today, they're emerging, they're premium. They're certainly not going to scale to like the masses. And it's certainly not something that somebody who's struggling with food insecurity would be exposed to. And so I do want to be very clear whenever I talk about trends that these are like sort of the emerging, kind of on the fringe, cutting edge trends, and not reflective of the American or global population of, how people eat.
Right.
But yeah, does that answer the
yeah,
question?
it does. I mean, and it's hard because I talk about trends. I'm like, these are the people coming to your meetings, and these are the people coming to your restaurants, and what are they looking for? And so I think restaurateurs and food service company people are seeing this across the board, but it also, we have to figure out, and I love the fact that everybody's looking at food waste, because that is one of our biggest challenges, to be able to feed everybody in the world. So it's great that the trends are kind of coming to converging in that conversation. It's hard to see sometimes too, right?
Right. Yeah.
So what makes a good disruptor in this marketplace? I mean, how do they do that? And getting on Shark Tank and talking about this and getting Mark Cuban to say, hey, here's my money, right?
Sure. So I think it boils down to a few things. I think disruptive innovation and really innovation in general. And I'll back up and say that I think the word innovation gets overused sometimes and applied to things like product line extensions or reformulations or packaging updates. And those are really important things for a company to have in their portfolio, and it adds incremental growth. But I don't consider that necessarily innovative. I just consider that product development. So I think to make that distinction is important. So when I think about innovation and even taking a step further, what's disruptive, it needs to add value to a consumer's lives, and like ideally on a repeat basis. So you need to be able to buy it again and again and again. It needs to be differentiated and unlike anything else in the marketplace. It needs to fill a gap in the consumer's life. It needs to be well timed, because I think sometimes some of these innovators, especially some of the emerging brands that we've talked about, might be kind of early. And, when I think about like insect protein, for example, it's a promising idea. It has a lot of sustainability benefits and some nutritional benefits, but a lot of American consumers are still really squeamish about that idea. And so I think it's not, any early efforts in that area have not been well timed. I think it might take a little bit more time for mainstream acceptance of that. And then it needs to be scalable, because the coolest idea in the world isn't viable unless you can commercialize and scale it.
Right.
It needs to be accessible to your target consumer in price and availability. And I think especially now with all the supply chain challenges, it needs to be simple. I think that, we have a tendency to overthink innovation, or look at examples of people who are doing some really cool, crazy tech things and getting a lot of funding to do it. But really, I think a lot of successful innovation is simple and relatively easy to achieve. Especially in a challenging operating environment.
Yeah. And I think, in what exactly what you said and what we're seeing in the marketplace across the board, and, tankers still holding, not tankers, but boats still holding cargoes of food product and clothing product and out there, it is a challenge. But then the prices of food at this moment too is a huge factor as well. And if you can, I think some of these people, if you can utilize your local farmers, right, or do something different with that, I think it really will help boost a variety of different ways, right?
Sure.
Now, one of these things too is, and I remember seeing, I was so excited. This was years ago. Not Mary's Gone Crackers, but Mary's, it was the little cakes. They were at Mary's gluten-free cakes. I'm going to forget it. Or is it Mary? Anyways, I was so excited to see them in a hotel sundry shop, right? And so my question to you is all these trends, and when I walk through Natural Products Expo, I'm thinking about it from the meetings perspective, right? How can I get it on a break? A break buffet? How can I get it on the breakfast buffet? And when I talk to a lot of them, granted they're all new, they're up and coming, being innovative. They're like, food service? What are you talking about? Right. So they're more of that retail side of it, getting into the grocery stores. Do they need that first to be able to get in to the food service side, or can we work it around? How do we get them into food service?
I actually think, and this is based on a lot of conversations I've had with startup founders, is that food service, somebody that I talked to recently called it the golden channel, because it's high margin. It allows a company to be profitable like years ahead of like people who go that traditional retail path. And anymore, I think a lot of companies start direct to consumer. And that's really important, not just because the barrier to entry is a lot lower than retail, but also, and also the margins are better, but also it's a way to sort of test and iterate a concept early. And so, it's kind of more like dipping your toe in,
Right.
to like be able to put a product out there, engage with your biggest fans, figure out if this is the messaging that you want to put out there, figure out if this is the formulation that people like, and then go from there. Okay. So I think anymore, that's the traditional path. I think retail is almost like the last resort for a lot of people because it is so expensive.
Right.
And it's resource intensive because, you got to be on the store level, checking your display, checking your facings, that's and making sure that everything is how it should be. And a lot of these chains, there's just so many buyers and people to interface with, and brokers and distributors. So anymore, I think, especially now that we're in a post-pandemic place, and meetings are resuming, and food service opportunities beyond like traditional restaurant, but like corporate offices are reopening, and things that ways that consumers might interact with a brand outside of the grocery store or online.
Right.
Those opportunities are super important and really lucrative, honestly, to brands, especially early stage brands that are bootstrapping their companies.
Well, and I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who's a member of La Dames, and she was talking to somebody like, okay, they asked her, so how many truckloads are you going to bring? And she's like, my little, delivery truck, it's not going to be an 18-wheeler, right? Because she's still just one person. And so it is figuring that out. And she's bootstrapping it and getting her product into a variety of different things. And she's got blueberry sauce and lemon curd and some freaking delicious pound cakes. But, well, I say delicious. I haven't eaten them because they're not gluten-free, but everybody else raves about them. But yeah, it is thinking about that way. But it reminds me of a session that I heard at Cater Source a couple of months ago. And it was the executive chef. He was the executive chef at the time of the Georgia International Conference Center in Atlanta. And he stopped using his national purchasing thing and went direct to farmer. And he was able to help farmers buy new trucks. And I love that, going directly to the source of getting that. But then how he helped elevate those small businesses, right? To give them that stepping stone to get 4 new contracts because of their relationship with that. And so I think that plays into some of the things that you were saying, because it is really important. And you don't think about it. You don't think about a sundry shop at a hotel, but it's a great way to show off a local product.
I agree. Yes. And, I actually had an experience recently where I was at a hotel and was really pleasantly surprised by the assortment and had a lot of fun looking at all of the options. But the thing that I ended up picking up there was one of the upcycled brands. I don't think I discussed, but it's called Confetti Snacks. And they use like ugly mushroom or like rejected or irregular produce in their veggie chips. And it's not like one of those sort of extruded vegetable chips that just looks like a fry or something, but it's actually like you see the actual vegetables and the beautiful colors, and they're seasoned, but they're vegetables that normally would have gone to waste.
And I think that's just really huge. And hopefully that hotels and chefs are making their own chips out of the same kind of products,
Yeah.
Right? Why not? Right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned before the show that you had a friend who had an allergic reaction.
Yes.
At a restaurant. Can you tell that story and what happened?
Yeah, so I was at a client dinner a few months ago, and the individual, I didn't know him very well before. I didn't know him at all before the dinner, but he had made the reservation, and it was a nice steakhouse here in
Mhm.
Kansas City. And he called ahead and said, I think they asked, does anybody in your party have food allergies? And he said, yes, I have a peanut allergy. And they noted that. And then when it came time to order, because this individual is vegan, he got the one vegan item at the steakhouse, which turned out to be like an eggplant with tempeh type dish.
Mhm.
Looked at it on the menu, sounded like something appetizing, and he ordered it. And a few bites in, he could tell something wasn't quite right. And so he asked the server, are there peanuts in this dish? And the server's like, I don't know. Let me check. And the manager came and confirmed that there were peanuts in the tempeh. It was a peanut sauce or peanut based tempeh. But it wasn't disclosed on the menu. So I think that's the problem number one. The fact that no allergens were disclosed on the menu. And I realize that it adds a lot of words and things that may not make a menu look so pretty. But I think it's really important that just table stakes, like disclose top 8 or 9 allergens on menus for each dish. So the manager did not have an EpiPen available. My fellow diner also did not have an EpiPen with him. Not that it should have been his responsibility, but so the way that it was handled was his meal was comped, and the manager offered to call an ambulance. And he ended up my fellow diner ended up being okay, mostly.
Right.
I mean, he had a pretty rough night, as you can imagine. He was okay, and then he did call the restaurant afterwards and explain the experience and just said, maybe take into consideration the fact that you made a reservation, you took down the fact that there was a peanut allergy, you still served me a dish with peanuts, you didn't disclose it on the menu, and you weren't really adequately prepared to, address the situation. So.
Yeah, and that it's interesting that you said the thing about the EpiPen not being, they didn't have one, and places of public accommodation like restaurants and hotels and convention centers are able to stock them in 36 states right now, give the ability for places of public accommodation to actually get EpiPens. And you have to have somebody on staff that's able to administer it, has been through training of it, but it does get a little bit pricey, especially when they have to be renewed every year. And hopefully you're not having to use them in your restaurant, but the fact that you potentially have them. But yeah, I mean, the next couple of weeks, I'm talking about that food safety aspect of it. What can, food service providers do to create that safety space, right? But it is, the challenge of it too is the labeling. And we were talking too about some new labeling that I saw at the Whole Foods in Wilmington, North Carolina, when a couple of weeks, last week I was there, and this made without gluten ingredients is the way that they're putting that on the hot bar. And we were chatting about using gluten-free, and when you take it out of the bag, it doesn't make it gluten-free anymore, right?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I understand sort of dancing around the language a little bit as a way to sort of cover yourself, because, now that the FDA, for I think the last maybe 8 years now, has had a sort of a definition for gluten-free and a standard of how facilities producing gluten-free foods, parts per million and all of that stuff. Whereas before, I was just kind of like made without gluten was gluten-free. And now we have certification around it. And so I can see an operator being careful about how they label those products. And I mean, if you're, celiac, like you really have to, like, even any kind of contamination, like, is a problem. If you have a gluten allergy, but if it touched bread, like that's different, but you can't make an assumption of the user's, situation.
Exactly. And I think we saw a lot of those products. It does make it a challenge, the labeling of it, but the consistency of it. And we know that you're not 100% allergen free and or 100% gluten free environment, but there are steps that you can take to do that. And I think a lot of these products too that are coming out as well, finding dedicated facilities, and that's a challenge, going that we have to face as well when they put made in a facility of, that also processes this, and this, and vice versa. So, well, all right, we came here to talk about trends, but food allergy is one of the biggest trends. And that was a lot of the products actually at the Natural Products Expo or Expo West that we saw as well. So let's step away from that a little bit, 1 second, and talk about regenerative agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
Because that to me was a huge push at Expo West as well. And I'm seeing a lot of it on the news. And, do you see a lot of products that are promoting that? And how can, the meetings industry get in on that? Is there a way?
So I believe there's been a new standard introduced, and it's regenerative organic, I want to say, or regenerative organic certified, ROC. I had just learned about that right before Expo West. I don't know of a lot of brands that are using it because I think it is a relatively new third-party certification. I think a lot of what's happening is a lot of people are sort of sourcing ingredients, in different ways that might be regeneratively grown.
Right.
And kind of piecemealing that message together. I think the supply chain isn't advanced enough to be able to make something that has 100% regeneratively grown ingredients.
Right.
I think we have, some ways to go with that. We're seeing big companies that are investing, General Mills being one of the leaders in that, investing in regenerative agriculture. And then, some smaller companies that don't have that kind of scale are incorporating those ingredients into their formulations and messaging that on the pack. But I think that it's really, like we talked about upcycling a lot, but regenerative agriculture is another really important part of the mitigating climate change and the responsibility that the food industry has to advance those efforts.
Yeah. Well, and I just started listening, and I bought the book by Mark Hyman, Food Fix. And just listening to chapter 1 just fueled me from wanting to even do more of what I'm doing, because of the numbers and how food impacts us. I mean, and it impacts us not just from the way we eat it, but and actually the other day I was going through my podcast, my episode dropped yesterday, and I actually still need to ask you this question but what does safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage mean to you? And Brian from Bees and the D said, he's like, you typically think of food as just what's on your plate. He goes, but food goes all the way back to the beginning of the bees, and so you really have to think about, if you don't want chemicals on your plate, then are you thinking about them all the way through, right? So I thought that was just an interesting answer to the question, because it's really, really important to figure out. So
yeah, it's a really interesting point.
Yeah. Because you don't think about it. I mean, you open up a whatever bar or whatever package you eat. Do you think about, how that came about?
I think people do to a certain extent, but they don't go that far back.
Right.
They might think about who is the person behind this, or where was this ingredient grown. But I don't think that people are looking holistically at the entire supply chain or value chain behind each product they eat. And, sometimes that message just isn't convenient. So you don't want to know, you just want to enjoy your food.
Exactly. Yeah. I posted something, somebody posted that, eating this way is better. And I forgot, I posted on Instagram, and the comments below it, I'm like, I'm not giving up my cookies. I'm not giving up my McDonald's, whatever. And it actually was a USA Today story. And I need to go find that again, because I thought it was hysterical. Like, even my friend Sarah replied to my story going, I'm not giving up my cookies. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I think if somebody were to tell me tomorrow that coffee had massive health implications, I would just be like, well, yeah, I had a good run. But nobody's taking my coffee away.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there comes a big balance in that, figuring all of that out for all of us. So.
Yeah.
All right. So on that note, going back to that question, what does safe, sustainable, and inclusive mean to you personally and or from the role that you have?
So I kind of glom on the word inclusive because I think that it kind of has several layers to it. I think when we think about allergen free, that's a big part of it. When I look at certain brands that are, they bill themselves as like top 8 or top 9 allergen free. I think a lot of people look at that as, oh, well, that's not for me because I can eat anything. I don't have any allergens. But I think what's important is the fact that these companies are making something that's delicious for everybody, regardless of whether it has allergens or not. I think that that's the way that a lot of these companies are creating products now and formulating and marketing is like, this is for anybody who wants it. Like there's a company called Safe and Fair, and they do popcorns and trail mixes and other snacks. I want to say top 9 free, but it's like really fun flavors like birthday cake and honey crisp apple pie and things like that. So it's really appealing. It has mass appeal. It's not just for people who are seeking out this type of product. So I think like when we think about inclusive, we think about anybody can eat it because, chances are, somebody that like are with or dining with has a food allergy and, I think table stakes, anybody who has an allergy should be able to eat. Right. Sustainable. I think, we talked about regenerative agriculture and upcycling and some of these other interesting innovations or sort of ways to measure, impact in the industry have been emerging. And I think, an interesting thing that hasn't really gained a lot of traction is the concept of biodiversity and the fact that Americans only consume like 15 different plants and like 5 different species or something like that, like 80% of people's diets. I wish I had the exact stat because like maybe like on your next show you can you can clarify this.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But the fact that there are so many amazing nutritious plants out there that have these sustainable benefits, soil fix or nitrogen fixing, carbon sequestration, like all of the agricultural benefits, as well as the nutritious benefits that we're not always getting a good cross section of nutrients in our diets when we eat the same things all the time. And it also has implications for solving food insecurity and feeding a growing global population. So I think like how do we unlock, bringing more crops into our diets is a big one. And then, I mean, safe, I don't know, like you shouldn't have to question, like, I guess it goes back to that food allergy thing, like you should be able to go and eat wherever you want and have that information readily available that will help you make that decision that's best for you.
Right.
Whether it's on a menu or in labeling. I just think that's really important.
Oh, those are all really good points. And they all mesh together in some sort of fashion. And it's something that people need to think about a little bit more, when they think about it, and not take it so much for granted sometimes, because we do. And we all do. And it's okay. And even my mom, it's funny because she went and she uses gluten-free pasta in the house so that I can eat it. But she, it's so funny. She's like, Tracy, I got the pasta and I'm looking at it and I'm like, Mom, this isn't the gluten-free. She's like, it's got the non-GMO logo on it. I'm like, I'm so glad that you picked it up for that reason. I'm like, I'm so proud of you, but it is, I got to go get the gluten-free one, which is fine. And let's combine those two, right? Non-GMO and gluten-free too. So, but no, I so appreciate what you do and what you write about, because it is really important for these small businesses to get up and running and be innovative and help reach a market that's more inclusive in our food and beverage. And so thank you for doing that. And
I love it. It's so much fun. Happy to do it.
And well, okay. So if you wanted to go Miss Foodie, where do you want to go eat that you haven't eaten?
So I actually don't go to a lot of restaurants, believe it or
Okay.
not. I actually like live in, so I would say I would go to Erewhon in
Okay.
Los Angeles, the really upscale grocery chain, and just like find a bunch of snacks and eat there.
Yep. I do the same thing because sometimes it's just fun to do that, right?
It
Yeah,
is
exactly.
best way to kill a Sunday afternoon.
All right, Monica, thank you so much. And everybody, I posted it on here. You can connect with Monica at foodbusinessnews.net. You can also find her on LinkedIn. I have that address here, and I will put that in the comments for you to reach out to her. But Monica, thank you so much about and talking to me today and the listeners about food trends and brands and disruptive innovation.
Thank you. This
You're
was so
welcome.
much fun.
It was very fun. Thank you. Everybody, for the next 3 weeks, we're talking about food safety, actually medical alert. Like what kind of safety do we need as meeting planners to understand? And the last week of August is going to be one of our meeting planner friends whose daughter just had her first anaphylactic reaction. They didn't even know she was allergic. And so Heather's going to come and bring that story to us. And she really wants to share what she experienced and what she now is going to do as a meeting planner. So I think that'll be really, really important. So again, thank you, Monica, and everybody. Until next week, stay safe and eat well. Thanks. And somebody posted a comment in here. Monica is amazing. Let's put it up here. Monica is amazing. So many good insights. Thank you for hosting, Tracy.
It's probably my sister.
And I don't have LinkedIn pulled up to even see. So whoever you are, thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yes. We appreciate it. So until next time, stay safe and eat well, everyone.